Now this is kind of amazing. Out of a couple hundred films that Roger and I each saw this year, we agree that the biggest disappointment of the year is Dune, with a huge budget, a talented young director, and a script based on a highly regarded science fiction novel. This whole film looked ugly, as if the lens were filthy, telling the story of a young prince's attempt to bring peace to the universe by conquering bad guys and conquering bad giant worms that threaten to eat everything and everyone.
How's it going, everybody? This is Jason Horn with Longboxer. Today we're going to take a look at Dune. This is a Marvel Super Special adaptation drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz, which is pretty much the reason I wanted to look at this. But before we get into this, if you like comics that are like a sci-fi that takes place on a desert planet, allow me to take this chance to tell you about my new comic, Settle. It's about a grumpy old loner named Malone who runs a deep space settlement, and he kind of starts to discover that the robots that work the settlement with him are becoming more than he kind of bargained for. And he's kind of like dealing with some dark stuff from his past as he deals with his last week before he retires. So I just started a Patreon. New page goes up every Monday. I'll have a link below in the description. So, like I said, if you're a fan of sci-fi that takes place on a desert planet such as Dune here, you're going to love it. Check it out. Let me know what you think. So right off the bat, I'll say that I am not a Dune person. There's some people that are like super into the novels, who probably hate this movie. I don't know. But I'm just, so when I'm talking about this story, I might butcher it because, like I said, I'm just not a Dune person. I've never read the novel or any of them. I think there's like 6 of them. So I'm not familiar with those. So if you're looking for an expert's opinion on this adaptation, that's not me. But I have seen the movie, pretty recently, actually. I rewatched it just because I was kind of getting into this. And this is it's a faithful adaptation to the movie. There's a lot packed in here, just like in the movie. There's a lot packed in there. But all right, so let's open this up and check out Dune. Right off the bat, like such a good image to open on there. So, like I said, this is Bill Sienkiewicz. The script, I guess, or whatever, the adaptation for this was done by Ralph Macchio. I think he was like a Marvel editor at the time. I know that name mostly because it just reminds me of the Karate Kid, I guess. I'm not super familiar with like what all he did though, but I think he was, I guess, like a writer and an editor at Marvel. But Bill Sienkiewicz on art, I mean, that's about as good as it gets. And so this is adapting David Lynch's Dune. So if you're like me, so I'm not a Dune person, but I am a David Lynch person. That's why I probably ever saw this movie to begin with. This is not a movie I grew up with, I should say. It's something I came to later, like in my 20s, I imagine. Yeah, I would say my 20s. So this isn't like one of those sci-fi staples that I grew up with, kind of like Blade Runner. I didn't see Blade Runner until I was in my 20s as well, so it just didn't have the same kind of impact that it probably did on people who saw it when they were, like teenagers or something. I don't know. But so I'm familiar with the movie more like later in life. So I imagine a lot of people were like that. I can't imagine growing up watching Dune the way, people grew up with Star Wars or something. And from what I've read, like this was set out to be, as far as the film goes, set out to be like a Star Wars for adults. It was it was one of the things I read. I thought that was kind of fascinating. But anyway, before we dive deep into this, we could just talk about Bill Sienkiewicz in general. Like, he's one of my favorite artists, and I guess most people probably know his work when you think of Bill Sienkiewicz. A lot of people would probably think of New Mutants stuff. And so I was just going to take a quick look. Most people are probably familiar with his work on New Mutants, but, it's for the time. So this is like mid-'80s. It's around the same time. So, like, this Dune came out in, like, 84, and then this issue of New Mutants came out in like 85, so it's around the same time. Just not your typical Marvel house style stuff. It's just so different, and I think that's why it had such an impact. Like, when I think of Sienkiewicz's work, I think of it as like more like expressive and emotional than almost anyone I could think of. It's certainly not a normal like house style, especially for superhero stuff. So his work is very, like I said, it's expressive, and it's very different than what was on the stands at the time. So, especially for superhero comics, like just mainstream stuff, it's usually not this interesting looking. And New Mutants was had been around for a while before he took over. So like a few years or close to a few years, the property had been around. But so he takes it over and adds like super interesting characters like Warlock. I mean, you're just not going to find an image like that in most modern comics at the time in the mid 80s. So that's Bill Sienkiewicz. One of the other things that I know him for is Stray Toasters. So this is from Marvel's Epic line, which is like creator-owned stuff, where he also did Elektra Assassin, which is probably one of his most well-known works as well. So I think this is maybe like a little after Elektra Assassin, if I'm not mistaken. And this, I tried. So I'm gonna admit I've never actually read this series. So it's like 4 prestige format issues of Stray Toasters that Bill Sienkiewicz did, and he wrote and drew this. And it's very, it's like to me, no, I don't mean this in a bad way, but it's like an impenetrable poem. It's just like poetry. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's just very, it's beautiful. There's just so much, it's kind of, like I said, it's impenetrable. When I see so much text, I would just want to look at the pictures. I think that's all I've done with these. I think I've only kind of flipped through it and looked at the issues, like the art of the issues. But anyway, I got them all out of cheap bins over the years, and I mean, they're just beautiful, but I have no idea what this story is about. But dadgum, I mean, it's like, just very expressive and just crazy looking, the amount of detail in on these paintings. I'd love to see his originals. I don't think I've ever seen original Bill Sienkiewicz, but I mean, just beautiful. So that's Bill Sienkiewicz. And Marvel had done like a few like movie adaptations in these graphic novels, much like this one, Buckaroo Banzai. If you want me to review that, leave a comment, let me know. Maybe we'll talk about that sometime. But let's get into the story here. So a lot of people probably have heard of like the journey that it took to make Dune into a movie. There's like a documentary where Jodorowsky attempted to make it for years. He's kind of a problematic figure, but it's a really interesting documentary. I can't recommend that enough. But he tried, for years to make it, and actually after him, Ridley Scott was apparently hired to direct it. That's something I'd learned recently. So Ridley Scott was going to direct it into 2 movies, but he left to make Blade Runner, which is, that's a pretty good trade-off. But David Lynch had directed Elephant Man, and that had gotten a lot of attention, and so that's kind of like how he was handed this huge movie. So like David Lynch had done Eraserhead and Elephant Man. I still think it's crazy that anyone saw those 2 movies and thought he would be good for Dune. So essentially, this starts out with this kind of like laying out the story here. And I think in the film, this stuff was added later, this kind of like prologue, kind of just explaining what all is going on, because there's so much packed in here. Because I think Lynch's original edit was like 4 hours. And of course, the studio wasn't going to let that happen. So he had to edit it down to 2. So he added a lot of like voiceover stuff. And I think that's where a lot of the weird, when I think of Dune, when I think of Lynch's Dune, I think of the weird whispering, monologues that are going on inside people's heads. And it actually makes a little more sense in this comic, because like thought balloons are more of a thing, but like it's super weird in the movie, especially just because they're whispering. It's like ASMR sci-fi weirdness. So the story is, it's complicated, and I'll probably butcher it, but this is like, kind of the emperor kind of guy. He's like ruling all these sectors of space, and they have these weird, I thought these guys were aliens, these weird guys in this big container thing. I think they're like humans who have like evolved into these big crazy looking, alien looking things, through exposure to spice, which is like what this whole story is about. So over the years, these weird guys have been mutated or whatever because of this spice, and they can they control the navigation through space, like being able to safely fold space so that interstellar travel is is available to these people. It's because of these guys. So because of that, the flow of spice pretty much equals space travel, and so they're hatching this scheme to make sure that that spice is going to keep flowing, because this guy feels threatened by the Duke Leto of the House Atreides. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But anyway, that's Kyle MacLachlan's father. So Kyle MacLachlan, he's like one of my favorite actors, and this is his first first team up with David Lynch. So that's pretty important and special. Like, they would go on to do Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, obviously, and then Twin Peaks: The Return much later, which is absolutely amazing. But anyway, so his dad's in charge of certain sectors of space, and then this Emperor dude has hatched a plan to give the Spice Planet to his dad, but only in an attempt to assassinate him and kind of take over everything and not feel threatened. And the other thing I think I knew about Dune before I saw it, that I would always think about, like, oh, that's the thing with Captain Picard in it. And he's pretty great in it. There's a lot of good, it's a huge cast, a lot of good people. Like Dean Stockwell, it's a great cast. Sting shows up. And so I think the thing that made the least sense to me watching it and reading this adaptation still, I don't get it. These like weird nun ladies, I don't really understand what they are, but his mom is one of them, and she was supposed to only have daughters, but she had a son, so that's kind of why he's special. That part doesn't really add up to me a whole bunch, but it's a huge part of the story that I never really understood. And exactly why these dudes are so like nasty and weird. So the bad guys, essentially, other than the big Emperor guy, the bad guys who are actually doing the dirty work are these weird diseased guys. As you probably know him from, he's the weird fat guy who like flies or floats around, whatever, and brings Sting in later. I don't really understand like what their deal is, other than they just want the power, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, so they're hatching a plan to take over everything. And this is that, see, he's like literally folding space. That's a weird, interesting choice. I don't think this is like something that I see in the movie. Maybe, I don't remember it. But like Sienkiewicz is showing one of these weird mutated guys literally like folding space with his hands. That stuff isn't really fleshed out a lot. And the colors are great in this. So Marvel released this entire story in issues, like individual issues. I don't have those to compare, but those have different coloring. Like, so this is on slightly nicer paper, but the printing process on this is much nicer than just normal dots on the comic kind of coloring. So, but the coloring on this is great. I'm not sure, like I said, because it looks kind of paintery. I'm not sure if this was full painted or how it was done, but the colors here definitely are going to look different than those individual issues. So they go to this planet, this desert planet, which is called Dune. Essentially, I think that's like there's another word for it. Arrakis, is that right? I don't know. I think it's Arrakis, but people call it Dune because there's a bunch of sand dunes. But anyway, so they're going there to take over. They're going there to take over this planet, and so they're monitoring like the spice production is what this scene is about here. And then one of the other things, like I knew, Patrick Stewart, Kyle MacLachlan, but also the sandworms. That's the other big thing that people probably know this from. It's got the Beetlejuice sandworms in it. I grew up with Beetlejuice. Those sandworms I know about. This I didn't know about till later. But anyway, so that's Sienkiewicz's introduction to the sandworm. You don't really get, this is kind of like just a weird mouth-looking thing. It doesn't really feel like you see the whole worm here the first time you see it, which is kind of an odd choice. But anyway, so this I also didn't understand why. So Dean Stockwell is like part of Duke's like entourage or whatever, but he betrays him. But he only betrayed him so that he could kill the weird fat guy, the floaty guy. I don't understand that either. I feel like a lot happened. Like in this section in the movie, so much is happening and in a short amount of time, and then the rest of the movie, like I get it, but so much stuff is going on at this part in the movie that I was a little confused, even though I've seen it before. But he gives him this weird secret tooth to murder the Baron. The Baron's a big fat guy. Anyway, I don't really get all that. So then as he was like betraying them, he took the shields down, so all the bad guys come in and start blowing stuff up. And again, this is the big floaty guy. They've killed a bunch of them. He's got Duke Leto's wife. I'm sure I'm butchering this story. Apologize. I think it's interesting. A lot of like the times when Sienkiewicz would use like black around all the borders. I've thought about doing that in a lot of my comics. I've only done it a few times though, but it's interesting. There's a lot of it here. It looks really good. I'm wondering how that looked, or if that was even possible on the Marvel issues on the newsprint. I don't know. So, essentially, after all this, Leto tries to kill. He uses that weird tooth thing. The gas comes out. And he tries to kill the Baron, but he doesn't. So he dies. Kyle MacLachlan and Duke Leto's wife get away. This is beautiful. Like, I've been drawing a lot of eyeballs lately. As you do, and man, every time I'm like, I wish I could draw a good eyeball. Those are pretty cool. It's a cool effect. So that looks crazy. That's some Bill Sienkiewicz stuff right there. So this sequence here, it's about his sister, because his mom is actually pregnant, which gets really weird later. But this shows like this is some really cool like effect, like really good like leading the eye through this page effect that Sienkiewicz does here. And they put up these like thumper things to kind of draw the worms, and you actually get to see the worm much better here. So much black on these pages. It looks so good, but like if you see these are the Fremen, these guys that are like who live on the desert planet and kind of have a connection to the worm. But like look at this panel, it's just so dark, but it reads so clear, even though it looks kind of dirty and inky. But anyway, and this is the introduction of Sean Young's character, like the love interest for Kyle MacLachlan. I feel like she gets kind of cut out of the comic a bit. Maybe it's one of the ways that they were trying to like save time, I guess. But they don't really show her as much as I feel like she's in the movie. So he becomes kind of like Kyle MacLachlan kind of becomes like the savior figure to these guys. Man, this sequence here is crazy. So this is. This is the stuff with the mom being pregnant. Man, these effects here are great. Like this is what I think of when I think of Sienkiewicz, as opposed to like a lot of these pages he's just like packing in so much storytelling here and there. But like some of the craziness that you would see in New Mutants would be stuff like this. And this here, like these sequences here is like that's very Sienkiewicz to me. So there's also this stuff with the water of life that she drinks. I don't really understand all that. But anyway, he teaches them this weirding way thing where like they can hum and break stuff. It's like a weapon that only they know how to use, and he teaches the Fremen how to do it. And it's such a weird image of Kyle MacLachlan, but it's really good. These two pages look really great. Like it's not so packed in. It gets to breathe a little more, which I love. And the coloring's really good. Like I said, it's kind of painted on here. I would like to compare it to the issues. But anyway, so this begins as like 2-year part, and this part of the story is like this 2-year battle between, I guess after this. So he like learns how to tame the worm or whatever. Again, like these kind of brush, like inky, splotchy stuff is very Sienkiewicz as well. But this kind of begins this sequence where he's like, they battle these guys for like 2 years, and he meets back up with Patrick Stewart's character, and then he drinks the water. I don't know what the water thing is, but at any rate, his mother's given birth to this girl, but I think she's like has accelerated growth or whatever, and it's freaking out the weird, not aliens, but the dudes who look like aliens. I think they're all like really freaked out that this daughter was born or whatever. Anyways, that's some really good images of the worm. I've never heard whether or not like the sandworms from Beetlejuice came from like I assume it had to be inspired by this, but I've never heard about any kind of connection. Let me know if you have. This is really cool, like running the sound effect all the way across, even into to the edge of the page. And that's something they probably couldn't do due to printing restrictions in the issues. I'd like to see how that compares as well. It's cool to see like the different types of the way he would letter sound effects. Like this is kind of traditional in my mind, whereas that's a little Sienkiewicz-y. But anyway, so they have this big battle, and he finally, this is kind of wrapping up the story, they use the worms, like he figures out how to use the worms against these dudes, to the point where the big fat guy kind of gets thrown into the mouth, and then there's this big battle with Sting, which is utterly insane. Patrick Stewart, I watched a video, Patrick Stewart said this, he told this awesome story about when he was working on this, like, so Patrick Stewart, not really into modern music at the time, and he had no idea who Sting was. And so he was just talking to him one day, and he's like, "What do you do? I heard you're like a musician or something." He's like, "Oh, I play," and Sting told him, "I play in a band." And Patrick Stewart like, "Oh, what kind of band? Or what's the band?" And he said, "Police." And Patrick Stewart thought, he's like, "Oh, a police band. That's cool." So he thought he was like in a band like made up of police officers or something, like a police. I don't know. It was a really funny story. But anyway, so he fights Sting and wins, and then that's a cool effect. This is a really great page. And then like literally gets kind of gory. He uses that yell thing to like do him in for good, and then the creepy little sister thing declares that he is the Messiah, and that's kind of the end of the story. And the story continues in those books. There's a bunch more books, but that's about it for this. Then there's the credits for the movie at the end of this. So this still says a David Lynch film. He took his name off of the movie. I haven't been able to figure out, did he take his name off the movie when it hit theaters, or did he take it off later when they were forcing some... I think he was mad about the TV edit that was longer, that included things that he didn't want in there or something. I don't know. Or did he just take his name off the film altogether? I'm not sure. And that's just like a panel from the comic, I think, on the back there. But anyway, that is Dune. Super great comic. The great cover by Sienkiewicz. Those issues all have really good covers by Sienkiewicz as well. Let me know, let me know how badly I butchered this story. Anyway, that's Dune.
Wow, that's boring. I've had more fun with sand at the beach. I think it's impossible for anyone who hasn't read the Dune books to follow what's going on in this story, which is needlessly complicated. And then there is a whole layer of ugliness throughout the picture. A guy with boils all over his face, the ripping open of people's chests, a premature birth of a baby in blood. Why all of that garbage?